Okay, Scott. So, um, repeat your question.
Okay, so what spurred the recording of this video was my mentioning of being torn between two teachings of the instruction of doing something uh sort of like mentioned in in certain suttas and Dhammarato's teachings, like two kinds of thoughts, for example, whereas you can literally choose which path you want to go down. You can go down the wholesome route or the unwholesome route. And then there's also the type of spiritual teaching more in the Advaita flavor, or maybe something like Dzogchen, where the instruction is you actually don't choose any of your thoughts and it's all just happening. And all you have to do is realize that and surrender to the process. And you can't really choose whether you go down a wholesome or unwholesome path. So both of these instructions have resonated with me at different times, but I don't really know which one to kind of land on. So this is what has started the conversation. Yeah.
All right. Who said that you had to land on something?
Well, nobody said that, but that's my dilemma.
All right. Guess what? That dilemma that you're having in your mind was uncontrolled. It just happened. That's Dojin.
So that's Doge. Okay, okay.
All right. So the point is that everybody starts out in ignorance. We don't know. The mind just goes where it's connected to go. Freud called this free association. And that's why he would sit with his notebook and let people just randomly talk. Now, one thing about Freud was is that he made a point that he's not trying to get a cure. He's trying to find out what's going on or what is the problem. Diagnosis, right? Except that in electronics and things, part of the diagnosis is trying things out. An example is that when a laptop is dead, we got to try various things. We got to make sure we got power into the power supply. We got to make sure that the power supply is connected, and I'm talking about the power brick, is connected to the laptop correctly. Is there a problem with the plug? And often what we do is substitution to try to diagnose and find out what the problem is. So this is the issue of ignorance, is that we don't know what the problems are. This is a basic point of the um, second noble truth. In fact, you ask about a Pali word, samudaya, and that is things just come up. Things are arising. When you're driving down the road, even if it's a familiar road that you've driven down before, it's always something new. New accidents, new people crossing the street, new potholes, all kinds of stuff are brand new. And in that regard, that's back to the Fortean point about free association, just that the mind jumps from here and it jumps to there. And also, you heard the expression within Buddhism of called the monkey mind, that it just jumps, it just leaves, it just goes. Now, one of the qualities of that jumping and leaving and going is that the monkey mind, when it jumps from here to there, when it gets there, it's still not satisfied. It might be afraid of something, and so it jumps someplace else. This would be like a beginning diagnostician or someone who's just playing around with their laptop trying to figure out what's wrong with it without having a systematic diagnostic system. So Dogen comes in and tells them that, yeah, that's what's happening is that things come up. And that often when things come up, it's because of, or there's a cause in there, the samudaya, that things are arising because they have the propensity to arise, and that in modern language we can use the word habit, that old habits, or actually new habits, come up. So if we leave it there, then nothing's going to happen much. But if we actually investigate this stuff that's arising, then that's right noble viewing. Right noble view is to really look at what's going on. I see, by the way, no distinction between what I'm talking about and Dogen, though you're finding a dilemma that has arisen in your mind, right? And that the point is, and that I've heard this with the Mahasi method too, that if you keep looking at it, you'll figure it out, and then you'll slowly start to make some changes. You'll slowly start doing some diagnostic work, and you'll slowly start making changes, right? Well, that's not much different than what we're practicing, except that within the context of the Buddha, he says, why do it slowly when you already know that that kind of thought is unwholesome when you see it? Why don't we go ahead and do something about it now, in the sense of taking the right noble effort now, rather than, let us say, adjusting our posture after our butt really hurts? If we can see the posture that we're in is a little bit of hurting, let's do something about it as soon as we see it, rather than let it build up.
Right, but that's my dilemma, is how does right noble effort arise? Is there a chooser of right noble effort? Is there a person that chooses the right noble effort? What are the conditions for right noble
Well,
effort?
actually, uh, when it hurts enough, you'll change. Can you get that? That if it hurts enough, you will change. That this is
Yeah.
actually that part of the 16 stages of insight is that by the student examining and seeing, and things begin to dissolve and fall apart, and there's nothing really much there, and then the student gets greatly afraid that there's nothing to it. And this is
So
what's called.
wait. So just you now saying when it hurts enough you'll change, that
Mm-hmm.
means that you don't really have that much difference from Daniel Ingram than you like to say about the whole
Yeah.
Dark Night of the Soul. The whole
That's the whole point, though. The dark night of the soul
when it hurts enough you'll
is when it
change.
hurts enough.
Okay.
When it hurts enough, you will change.
But there's a shortcut, is what you're saying.
And I'm saying, yes, exactly. That's exactly the word that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa uses. That's exactly the word that in the Pali, in the Satipatthana Sutta, is the direct method. All
Uh,
right?
okay.
Rather than wandering around, stepping on things, let's start watching where we're going so that we don't step on things, because it's painful when we step on stuff. And so I don't see any particular difference in here, other than with wisdom, we can see things that do hurt, but they're not catastrophic in their hurting. And that the dark night of the soul is when we get to the point that things are really catastrophic, and we recognize and see without a doubt that we've got to make a change. All right.
Oh,
You've heard the example of that if a frog is put into cold water and then the put on the stove and the heat turns up, the frog may get boiled to death. But if you put the frog in boiling water, he's going to jump out immediately.
right,
All right. This
right,
is the point then. The Dogen system is um, just let things heat up and maybe you'll get the chance to jump out. That's also the issue with the Mahasi method.
right.
But the Anapanasati practice is all about recognizing that, wait, the water's getting warm here. Maybe I ought to do something about it before I get cooked.
Right.
This is when we bring wisdom into it. But in the beginning, for the beginners, it's all the same. It doesn't hurt enough to take any effort to do it.
Yeah.
But the Dogen method that they're talking about, eventually people do something about it. When they can see it well enough, when they see how badly it actually is and they're actually hurting with it, that's when they're going to make a change.
Okay,
Another
so
example. Go ahead.
let's say uh going with the frog analogy, let's say you're the frog and you're in boiling
Go,
water
go,
and
go.
you're confused and you don't know quite how you got to the point of being a frog in boiling water. How do you jump out of that boiling water? What is the way?
Well, actually, it depends upon your knowledge of how bad it is. How deep is the dukkha? Okay, we can talk about it in the sense of hitting rock bottom. And I use that term because that's a term that is often used with Alcoholics Anonymous. That many people who have a benefit and an effect of AA is because they know that they've got to make a choice. They normally hit rock bottom, going to Skid Row. Now, a lot of people will go to Skid Row and they won't make a change. They still haven't hit rock bottom yet. This is actually about the Mahasi method is that you keep looking and you keep looking and not all of a sudden, but slowly, you begin to see that you've hit rock bottom. Now, with the AA, many judges have heard how good it is, and that they'll actually order someone into AA as part of their court procedures. And it almost never works. A judge can't order you to go to AA and get any benefit and the person get any benefit out of it. It's when they know that they've got to make a change. So, often people live their whole lives, kind of. I mean, they've got a house and a car and a wife, and still they live their lives in quiet desperation, as Henry David Thoreau mentions, which is a kind of Skid Row. But they haven't hit rock bottom yet. Now, the teaching of the Buddha is that dukkha is dukkha. Your dissatisfactions are dissatisfactions. You don't have to get into boiling water. If you're watching what's going on, you can see that things are getting warm, that they're getting hot. Okay. Here's another example: is that you've been to Thailand, so you know that there's a lot of animals that think that humans are delicious. And we wind up with whelps and mosquito bites and all kinds of things, and the propensity is to scratch. And if we do scratch it, that doesn't help.
It gets
Kicking at
worse.
it, okay, makes it worse.
Yeah.
Now, many people will just continue to scratch.
Right.
And that in Thailand, they'll teach the kids don't scratch. But in the West, we haven't learned that. And so we'll continue to scratch, and sometimes we'll make it really, really bad. And when we recognize, oh, I've made it a lot worse, then we'll start using salve rather than our fingernails to relieve the itch.
Right.
Okay, so right noble effort is actually getting a bomb, a tiger bomb, a monkey bomb, something that's got, camphor, eucalyptus, and menthol and that kind of stuff, and put it on there as a medicine or an ointment rather than scratching.
Right. So the itch is a simile or metaphor for the sense of lack, the sense that
Mhm.
something is missing, that
Something is missing.
something's not okay with right now. That existential feeling that
Exactly.
something is, yeah.
Quiet desperation versus noisy desperation.
Well, the quiet desperation eventually becomes noisy
It
desperation.
does. Yes,
Yeah.
that's the whole point. Eventually, we
Right.
keep going down. We'll hit rock bottom. It'll hurt.
Right.
And when it does finally hurt, then we'll do something about it.
Right.
Right? So, right noble effort versus right ordinary effort. Ordinary effort is after you've made a crash, you've got to do something about it.
Right.
Right noble effort means that you see it coming in advance and you do something about it.
Right.
An example is a guy's been on a long, long trip driving, and that he's gotten tired, he gets sleepy, he gets drowsy, and he wakes up and he recognizes that he's just gotten asleep. He needs to do something. He needs to stop, perhaps at the nearest grocery store, walk inside, get something to drink, go to the toilet, wake himself back up. But if he says, "Oh, I got to wake back up," and then he continues to drive, he'll get drowsy and sleeping again, and this time he runs off the road. And
Right.
then that'll wake him up. But he
Right.
still doesn't do anything about it, and he gets drowsy and sleepy again, and now he has a crash.
Right.
Okay? So that's exactly what we do. The
Right.
question is, do you have to have a crash before you wake up?
Okay.
And
Now,
that's what, go ahead.
can you relate this in any way to, because this is something that's kind of conditioned within me. Can you relate this to anything Christian themes about forgiveness? Because sometimes I feel a deep sense of guilt and shame for what I've done, and it seems like the only way out is to be forgiven by some higher power, to like
Okay.
to open up to something and like be honest about, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned.
Hmm.
Can you draw any kind of parallel to this?
Absolutely. We
Okay.
do need that forgiveness.
Okay.
And if we believe that there is some Father inside that does forgive us, then we feel forgiven. But the reality is that ultimately everyone finds their own forgiveness if they get it. If they ever get forgiveness, it's because they give it to themselves, ere though they take, let us say, the long way around by blaming God for the forgiveness. Now, I'm using the word blame in the sense of somebody else forgave me,
I
right?
think I
But
think
it's
that I
still
think
inside your own mind.
right. I think the issue I'm having is uh what's the difference between uh forgiving ourselves and being some kind of megalomaniac, egomaniac psychopath that believes he can do no wrong and get away with anything. You see what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Like I want to forgive myself, but I also don't want to go down the path of thinking, "Oh, I can do no wrong. I can get away with anything." Like there's kind of like a fine line there that I'm trying to distinguish.
Well, actually, it's not a fine line at all. When you get close enough to it, you can see that it's a spectrum.
Okay.
That um, let us say that this side of the line is black and that side of the line is white, but the line itself moves in a continuum rather than a black and white on and off. It's more of a rheostat, and that line is going through various stages of gray. And that we're just not paying attention to the gray areas when we see things in black and white, which means that there's going to be little forgivenesses and great big ones. Just like the boiling water is going to be not cold or hot, there's going to be gradations in between. And the question is, when does it ever get to be enough? Because you're not ever going to have an absolutely white life, just like you don't have an absolutely black life. Even megalomaniacs still want things from other people. That in fact they want someone to control so that they can feel in control. If they don't have anybody who will allow them to control, then they still have that sense of loss. Okay, so everybody is going through that quality of living a life of quiet desperation. The point is that how do we manage our own desperation? By trying to control other people, or by trying to suck up to other people? Or are we going to take responsibility for ourselves? Because both controlling other people and sucking up to other people is done ignorantly. And the interesting point is that this is a way of talking about the second noble truth. Trying to force other people to do it would be greed, and sucking up to other people would be ill will, in the sense of, I'm out of control, let me get into control. Or you can match those backwards. That greed would be that you're trying to get somebody to do something for you, and ill will would be you're going to make them do it.
Right. Okay.
So, in both cases, it's ignorance, and in both cases, it's being externally oriented rather than internally oriented.
Right.
And Jesus had said, in fact, it's quite famous, and I know exactly where it is. It's in the 17th chapter of Luke, and it's got a particular circumstance. But I won't tell you the whole story. But the punchline is that the kingdom of God is within you. That kingdom of God is within you is the whole point that we have of stop trying to get the outside world to do it by either manipulating it through sucking up and getting forgiveness, or by trying to take over. In both cases, we're not taking responsibility for ourselves. So, back to the original question about the random thoughts, the monkey mind, the free association, is that is done ignorantly and is happening on a regular, often basis. And the teaching of Dogen is to wake up to that, to see it.
Right.
And
Right.
if you can see it, then you have the opportunity to do something about it. And if you don't ever see it, then you can't.
Right.
That's exactly the Eightfold Noble Path right there. If you wake up and see that stuff, you have an opportunity to do something about it. And if you don't see it, if you stay in ignorance, you don't have any choices.
Right. Right.
And so both the Mahasi method and the Dogen is a slower approach, in the
Right.
sense of just keep looking, and pretty soon, after looking a lot, you'll begin to figure out that I would rather have it another way. Let me
Right.
actually start taking some effort to make a change here. That is actually in that 16 stages of insight, that's built in. After
Right.
you get so frustrated and you want out, That's it. Do you ever want out? Does that frog get hot enough to where he wants out?
Right.
And when you want out of it, you'll start making a change. Just like people who get into AA, if they want to make a change, AA would be very effective. But if somebody is put into AA because of the court or because some grandma or wife told you got to go to AA, that's not enough.
Right. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be
Be
saved.
saved, exactly.
Okay.
So the question is, when are you going to decide that you want to be saved?
Right.
And that's this moment, and then the next moment you don't, and then this next moment you do, and then the next moment you don't.
Because it's
You could
always
also,
changing.
everything keeps changing. Going down that highway is always a new adventure. Every moment is a brand new moment. And the question is, do you hurt enough to want to make a change?
So okay, so actually it's not so much different than some of the things my other it seems like you're saying kind of the same things that I've heard from my other Advaita teacher, is that someone who's in ignorance, he said something like someone who's in ignorance is like a guy who's hitting himself on the head with a hammer, and somebody asks him, "Why are you doing that?" And then he says, "Because it feels good when I stop."
Huh.
Or
So are you going to stop?
are you going to stop? Okay, okay. And and also another thing that he said, I want to see if you agree with this. Another thing they said is that when you are in ignorance, there's nothing you can do about it. As long as you are in ignorance, there there's no possibility to do anything about it, because as soon as you realize that you are in ignorance, you are already out of ignorance.
Well, yes, that's true. That's
Okay.
the waking up process. And uh, that's why we do have, I mean, can you imagine a world where there were no spiritual teachers because no one ever listened to a spiritual teacher, and all the spiritual teachers stopped teaching? And why do they stop? Is because they finally realize that nobody's listening anyway.
Nobody's listening. Okay.
Nobody's listening, all right? And that's the ignorance that we're in. However, that's not always the case. Sometimes, um, let us say that sometimes police are effective.
Right.
That you're stopped for speeding, some people are going to get back in their car and grumble and just push on that accelerator, angry that they got a ticket for speeding right along. But other people will be grateful in a way to that officer to save their life because it woke them up to slow down. Okay, so one sees the cop stopping you as a kind of dukkha. It's a wake up call. That's what they're out there for. But it doesn't wake up everybody. In fact, I would say that in general, cops are ineffective at waking people up out on the highway. My position is that traffic cops are much more like a sting operation in the sense that they're not really effective. They are effective for people who will listen to them, but a lot of them, that's why there's road rage, or let us say, people become more psychopathic in a car than they are when they're out of a car. Why? Because they see the car itself as a kind of protection so that they're immune to dukkha. And a
Right.
lot of people have that idea. That, in fact, the best current big example of that is Donald Trump. He thinks that he's immune, that he'll get away with it big time.
Right.
And he's eventually, he's heading, how they say, cruising for a bruising.
Right.
He's heading in the direction that he's going to have some payback. Just like the guy who speeds away from the officer who stopped him from speeding, and 15 or 20 miles down the road, he has a ding. He has an accident.
Right.
Okay, so the
Well,
accident actually is more effective at
you could
stopping
say
people.
you could
Go
say the
ahead.
same. You could say the same about almost all politicians, though. To be fair.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. That in fact, powerful people gain power because they think that they deserve it.
Right.
It's not just the politicians, it's the rich people, it's the
Donald Trump
bullies,
included,
it's
and all the
cops
other. Yeah.
themselves are all in that mentality
Yeah.
because they think that they can get away with it. They think
Well,
that they're immune.
it's almost like a very. It's almost like a really emphasized personality view. Like
Hmm.
becoming a powerful person, becoming a politician is like the first fetter of personality view taken to its fullest extreme almost. Would
Or
you say
some
that?
degree that's way out there.
Right.
Not necessarily the fullest extreme, but certainly going in the direction of being extreme.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So the question then for every one of us who are even people who are not very extreme of that, the question would be, when do we see that we've had enough? How bad does it have to hurt before we wake up? Do we have to hit rock bottom like the alcoholic? Do we have to get to Skid Row? Do we have to get busted and go to jail? And many times that doesn't solve it. All right. So that's the teaching of the Buddha, and that the wisdom says is that let's be wise enough so that we can get over something easily by taking the right effort. It's a matter of degrees. That things are not black and white, but the question is this enough yet? Okay, and so we begin to get mindful. An example would be scratching again, because I've talked to students about it. That I recognized the other day that Cathal was here, and we were in a conversation, and I started to scratch. And then I stopped because I saw it. And I'd already made a mental point that thou shalt not scratch, especially when you're in front of a student that you've told him thou shalt not scratch. Okay, so that's another point about hypocrisy. If you tell someone thou shalt do it this way and then you're not doing it that way yourself, that should be a wake up call. You've made that rule, you've stated it out loud, it makes a point. Can you catch that yourself? And most of us don't. We will make rules about how things should be, and then we just cruise right along, like thou shalt not sleep while driving a car. And it's best when we're really drowsy and sleepy to stop driving, even if you just have to pull over the side of the road on the freeway. That's better to do than to keep going back to sleep and causing a great big accident.
That's another issue I've noticed in the spiritual teacher and the student dichotomy is
Hmm.
that a lot of times the student will project onto the teacher some sort of impossible ideal that
Hmm.
there's some sort of perfect person when in actuality they experience highs and lows and issues just like everyone else. And
Everybody else. The question is, can he wake up when he's going high? Can
right,
he wake up when he's going low? Can
right,
he wake up when he's changing direction?
right.
That's the whole point is this is why we talk about it in the sense of mindfulness. Can you wake up to see what's going on? Do you have to wake up because you're hurting so bad? Like, can you wake up when you've gotten drowsy? Or you wake up when you first go to sleep and the car swerves? Or do you have to go to sleep and then only wake up because you swerved into someone causing a great big accident. In other words, can we watch where we're going so that we don't cause accidents? Now, driving is a good example because many people can drive for years and not have an accident. But if anybody's not watching where they're going, they're prone to have an accident. And Dogen is saying, looky, you're just living your life asleep. You're not watching where you're going. You're not seeing anything. This is why there's so much random thought. I saw that scratch, by the way. We were talking about scratching. Did you catch that? And seeing it so that we could stop doing it. So, that's the teaching that everybody has to go through, and I'm glad that you're bringing that up, is that we all go through life in a slumber. We're not really aware of what's going on. We're not aware of what we do causes dukkha. And that then the idea is, oh, if it's not a good idea to scratch, then when you do scratch, you a lot of people will just kind of ignore it and they'll continue to scratch rather than catching themselves and stopping it. So you can stop it when it just first happens, like going to sleep, getting drowsy, driving the car, and then you wake up and say, wait a minute, let's not do it that way. But other people will get drowsy, they'll go to sleep, they'll wake up, and then they'll go back to sleep again, wake up again, and the third time they go back to sleep, and then when they wake up is when they're rolling their car through the air. So, when are we going to wake up? That's the skill of sati. To wake up and take a look. And then we have choices, because a lot of times for the beginner, they wake up and they take a look, but they don't make a change. And then they wake up again and take a look and don't make a change. And then they wake up and take a look and have a crash. And then they decide that they've got to change. But a lot of people will keep crashing and blame somebody else, want forgiveness, want the insurance company to fix their car, and then they continue to drive the same way. They don't ever wake up to the real dangers that they see. And this is what the teaching of Anapanasati and the teaching of the Buddha is to wake up to this dukkha and make a change quickly so that you're not going to be spending very much time in a state of dissatisfaction. You'll be happy. Aha, I caught that scratching. Aha, I can see that stuff. But normally we want to hide from our problems. We want to hide from our wrongdoing. We want to ignore those kind of thoughts. And then we go around with a chip on our shoulder, getting angry a lot, trying to get it our way, trying to find happiness that way. And then we wind up hurting ourselves and hurting others. And so the whole teaching of the Buddha, whether it's the Mahasi method or whether it's the Zen or any of them, is at least start looking at what you're doing so that you can make a change. If you don't know what the problem is, you can't change it. And if you have the wisdom to say, oh, let's dodge it before it hits us. We don't have to make a target of ourselves. And so you came into a dilemma. I don't see a dilemma. I see it as a process. I see it as a development of skills. That if you can wake up and see it, and wake up and see it, and wake up and see it, and wake up happily to see it, and start waking up happily to see it, you're automatically starting to make those changes. You're automatically starting to put in the right noble effort.
even if even if I lose my way, I can still wake up and see it, even if I go off course. And
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it takes a real accident. Sometimes we have to have a major crash. But until you're dead, you have a choice. An example of that is somebody who gets into a major accident, goes to the hospital, maybe spends 6 weeks in the hospital. He's going to have a change in the way that he drives, at least for a while. Every time that I skidded out on my motorbike, after I got back on the motorbike, I was a bit more careful after that.
okay, I also have another question. It's probably related, but might be unrelated. Um, it was about some advice I gave to somebody who seemed to be experiencing some sort of mental illness, but obviously mental illness is a spectrum. In a sense, everybody who's not enlightened is mentally ill to some extent, that they're experiencing dukkha. But this guy essentially was telling me, oh, there's a purple man in my head who's telling me what to do, or there's a voice in my head who's a purple man who's telling me what to do. So this guy may have had like multiple personalities or something. And then I asked him, oh, is the purple man telling you to do kind, wholesome, and happy things or bad things? And he was like, no, it's telling me to do bad things. And then I
Mm-hmm.
told him, don't listen to the purple man. And I was like, is there any voices inside you that are telling you to do happy, wholesome, and loving things? And he's like, yeah, there's a ton of them. There's ones doing that. And I was like, oh, listen to that one. And so like I honestly I was just in the moment spontaneously reacting to
But that was brilliant.
I'm not a mental health professional, but that's just what I came up with on the spot. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I told them. And like obviously like I don't know what was going on with the guy. I just met him, but is hopefully that helped him. I don't like
If he can remember,
if you
if
can
you
remember.
impressed him enough to where he can remember that if he develops samsati, it's quite possible that he agreed with you completely, and then 10 minutes or an hour or 10 days later, he forgets all about what you said.
Right.
And that's often the case, is that we can tell people some really, really wholesome, brilliant things even, and they get it. They can hear it. And at other
Yeah.
times, they don't. Now, mental illness, as you can imagine me saying, is a spectrum.
Right.
All the way from the enlightened master, the Buddha, or whoever on one extreme, to the really, really, let us say, there are several kinds of diagnosis of psychosis. One of them is
Right.
called catatonic schizophrenia. This is when the guy is so afraid that he freezes so often,
Right.
okay, or that they have delusional thought. Like there was a book written called The Three Christ of Ypsilanti. That three different people had the delusion that they were all each one of them was Jesus, and
That's really
so
common. It's surprisingly common.
hmm and so what they did was that they put these guys not just in the same mental institution, but they put them on the same ward where they shared. And you know something? They accepted each other. They didn't believe each other that they each. And so I'm Jesus and you're not, but it didn't matter. They would accept that there was three Jesuses on the ward. But the story that I want to tell you that's so interesting is the guy about that was catatonic. By the way, this was all happening because I was associated with it in Ann Arbor, and in that area they have Ypsilanti State Hospital, and I had already worked at the South Carolina State Hospital, and so I know of how bad off people can get, that they get locked up. One guy killed his mother with an axe, etc., like that. But basically, it's the people who are the most mentally ill have a low IQ. They're not very smart.
Right.
A side example of that is that I was in my mom's facility. There was a woman who they had diagnosed as borderline schizophrenia. That they just said borderline. The fact is that she was retarded. She just wasn't very smart, and because she wasn't very smart, she just didn't make wise decisions. She made stupid decisions, and they labeled her as borderline schizophrenic.
Okay.
So, I'm not a fan of the diagnostic categories. What I am a fan of is anyone can wake up and start to make some new choices in life.
Right.
And that psychotherapists can, if they take that attitude, can be enormously effective at helping people wake up to see that the way that they're behaving is dangerous. But we don't see the danger. We blame other people for it, or that we try to get them to get us out of it, to rescue us out of our danger, rather than using it as a wake-up call. But in all the teachings is to pay attention to what the mind is doing. Recognize that you've got a monkey mind. Recognize that things just keep coming up and coming up. But if we have a choice once we start to pay attention to what's going on. There's a lot of, let us say, effort, especially in the religious world, to try to teach people you cannot wake up and make a change. That you must have a plastic Jesus riding on the dashboard of your truck, or you're going to crash that truck. You don't have any choice over it. This is a major teaching. That you need help. You need forgiveness from a God. You
Right.
need something because you can't do it yourself. The
Right.
answer to that is that, well, that's true, except that when people start waking up and paying attention to what's going on, then they do begin to have some choices. And that there's a whole issue of religion is trying to teach them that you don't have any choices. You've got a soul here, and that soul is fixed and permanent. You've got an original sin, and you can't fix it. You need to suck up to somebody else. But guess what? The sucking up then is a kind of a change now, isn't it? Yeah. So the Dogen is actually a change model only in the sense of saying, yeah, you've got these random thoughts. They just happen. Things are unconnected. They just keep coming up. Pay attention. The Dogen system doesn't say, oh, all of that stuff is happening. You can't do anything about it. Never mind. Just forget about the whole thing. Go home and forget about Zen. They don't say that. They say, oh, no, all of these random things are happening in the mind. Look at what you're doing.
Well, another thing I'd like to mention about Dzogchen is a lot of the Dzogchen pointers and styles of contemplation feels a lot like it induces a state of fourth jhana, of something like kind of just equanimity, letting it all in. A
Mm-hmm.
fourth jhana e.
Isn't that a major change to the way that they used to live their life?
And that is a change. Yeah.
Yeah, it sure is.
But they don't mention that in the pointer because it would defeat the purpose. So they kind of just like, it makes sense within the context of that style of meditation, but it's not as complete as the teachings of the Buddha
But it is the teachings of the Buddha, just a few pieces are missing. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, a 500-piece jigsaw puzzle, and 4 or 5 pieces are missing.
Okay.
And I can appreciate that that happened all across all of those centuries and across all of Asia. Zen, they didn't have the suttas, but they had the spirit.
And that shows up in Western Christian mystic traditions as well. And
Except
like,
that they've got a whole lot more magical thinking and a whole lot more,
right.
let us say, pieces of the puzzle missing. In fact, a lot of them, the pieces weren't missing. They were there, but they were taught to throw those pieces out, that they don't belong. That, in fact, in a real way, Christianity, even though you've got to have faith in Jesus and to let him save you and all of that kind of stuff, Christianity is still a change model. The better parts of Christianity is a real change model. To start looking at what you're doing, start recognizing that this is what they call sin and that you can do something about it, that Jesus expects you to straighten up your act. So the change model is actually built into Christianity. It's just not a major function of it. The change model is actually in Zen and in all the Asian teachings. It's only in the teaching of the Theravada, especially in the those who were very sutta oriented, is where we get that point about the change model is an important piece of that puzzle. You got to actively want to make a change. You got to watch what you're doing so that you can control the situation. And
So
then you
how do
become a
you
winner.
how okay, so how do you use the change model without falling into the trap of guilt that you aren't the way that you're supposed to be, or you're
The guilt model was actually taught because in fact, what guilt is feeling bad. The question is do you do it and then feel bad later because you've done it? Or do you see it in advance and recognize that if you do that, you will feel guilty, you will have the dukkha, and so you can see it in advance enough to where you can do something about it. Going back to the method or the point about driving down the road and getting sleepy, that's a guilt-inducing thing. All right, is that going to be enough, though, for you to stop driving and get off the side of the road, or go down the road just a little bit awake and then stop at the station, stop at the 7-Eleven or whatever, take a break and get back alert again? Or are you going to wait until you crash and then have a great big guilt? But guilt is actually supposed to be a lesson. That in fact, the words in Pali are hari and opata. And so we can look at guilt in 2 different ways. One is embarrassment. Like, I'll do it, but I don't want to get caught at it. That in fact, in some cultures, the one that I'm thinking about is the Spartan culture, the ancient Spartan culture of Greece, is that they sent those little boys out to steal, to go and, to ancient versions of shoplift. If you want to eat, kid, you better go steal the food. Don't get caught. If you get caught, we're going to beat the hell out of you. Okay? So there's a difference between stealing and not getting caught versus stealing and knowing that it's wrong and eventually you will get caught. So Guilt is, I've done wrong, and I know that I've done wrong. Is that going to be enough wrong or bad feelings for me to make a change? Or am I going to try to cover up my wrongdoing so that I don't get caught at it? So this is one of them, Harry, is actually the shyness or the embarrassment or the fear of getting caught. And real guilt is wanting to pay back, to do retribution. This is what they have in the AA, is to go back, and those people who you've really harmed, to go back and tell them that when I was drinking or when I was in bad shape, I really did something that harmed you and damaged you. And I want to come back and tell you that I see that and that I want to apologize to you for harming you. Okay? So the guilt has the quality of retribution or doing something about it to make up for the bad behavior, to where the other kind of guilt is shyness, in the sense of I don't want to get caught. All right? Guess what? The bigger one is don't wanting to get caught. That's the
Right.
place where most of us are.
Right.
And that's something that we can wake up to and recognize, oh no, there's a gray scale between the two. That one leads to, it's a downhill slope. Harry is a downhill slope into apata. That shyness about getting caught is a downhill slope into doing really harmful things and still not wanting to get caught at it. But eventually we'll hit that rock bottom down there at the bottom level of guilt of, holy crap, I've got to do something now to get out of this. So this is an interesting teaching, putting this together with Hari and Opata as also with the Dojin versus the Buddha's method of, let's wake up early. Let's forgive ourselves early. Let's not get into really bad situations, because we can wake up early to it before it gets too bad. And so it's much more of a continuum rather than one's black and one's white. There is a big, huge gray area in there, and that will help us to transition from one to another, realizing that we've got a choice in there. That the real model, the change model, is based upon choice, and you've got a choice of whether you're going to do bad and feel really bad about it, or recognizing that, hey, I'm not going to do that because look how bad I feel when I do it. Just like you can put your hand on a warm stove and that doesn't mean anything. It may be 5 minutes since it's been turned off. But if you put your hand on that stove immediately after it's turned off, it burns. And that burning, that heavy duty dukkha, is a wake up call. Don't put your hand on a stove. Here's an interesting point on the side with that. In the American Indian tradition, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, they have a distinction. So let's plan it this way. The family in America goes camping. They may be having some friends over. They may have grannies and there's some people around, and they've got a campfire, and the toddler goes towards, or the crawler goes towards that fire. People will start to jump. They'll get up. Someone will rescue the child to not let him go into the fire. In the American Indian culture, everybody will sit around with a great big grin on their face to see what that child does. Does he actually have to crawl into the fire, or does he get close enough to where the child himself recognizes that this fire? But in any case, the American Indian child is going to learn not to go into the fire, to where the Western young kid is not going to learn about the fire because he got rescued before he got burned.
Right. Okay.
And so by trying to save the child from being burned, the child doesn't learn about fire.
Right.
We have to learn it ourselves. Can we pay attention so that we can see?
Yeah. But something strange, if I'm going to reflect about my past, is that I've learned about fire and I've been burnt, but somehow I forget how bad the burnt was, and then I go back for more to get burnt
And
again.
again, so when are we going to wake up to this is fire? Let's not get burned.
So when
Why do we have to go get burned again and again and again, and we don't wake up to it? We don't have that. We continue to stay ignorant. We keep getting burned, and we stay ignorant to the burning.
right.
When are we going to wake up to? Oh, that's hot. We can tell. We can tell it's because when we get close to it, it gets warm. Let's not continue on because it's going to get hot really quick. It's going to get burning hot really quick.
Well,
And yet we don't wake up. We don't learn. We stay ignorant.
well, now that I think about it again, I did come back to get burnt, but there has been progress. For example, the first time I was burnt, I jumped all the way into the fire. I think maybe the second or third time, maybe I put my arm in and then maybe just my hand in, and now I put my finger
Finger
in,
in. Uh-huh.
and oh, that's hot, pull it out.
Mm-hmm.
So there definitely
Yes.
has been progress. I'm still ignorant enough to go back to being burnt, but I'm not getting burnt as completely as I used to.
That's
So,
congratulations. That's real progress.
yeah, congratulations. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
congratulations. That's progress.
It
We
is.
can see that that's getting hot. We put our finger in it instead of, oh, poor me, I've gotten burned again, and oh, I'm so guilty and I feel so
Right,
bad, and all of that kind of
right,
stuff. We can say, hot dog, I was really lucky. I only got the tip of my finger burned
right,
before I jumped right in.
right, right. But I think the important thing for me is that to not be in denial that I got burnt again. Sometimes I want to have the idea of myself as like, no, I can never get burnt again.
I'm never get burned again, and
I'm
then we
beyond
walk right
that.
back into it because we're not watching where we're going because we're
Not watch
oblivious.
not
We
watching
didn't
where
learn
we're going.
anything.
Right.
We didn't recognize that it was hot. We didn't recognize the signs of, oh, I could see that there's fire there. Fire is hot.
Right.
And so we keep walking right back into the fire and get burned over and over and over again. When do
Okay,
we
so
have to when do we have to do it to where we get really roasted?
okay. Okay, I'm really on board with this, but I want to hear you bring it back to like some sort of polycanon term of what would you say the fire is in relation to dependent origination and the progression of ignorance to craving, etc., and
Right.
dukkha.
Okay, so the paticca samuppada is that if I want something, in other words, you got into the fire because you wanted something. You reached right into the fire. You saw maybe a gold tooth or something in that fire, and you reached in there because you wanted it and didn't recognize that you were getting burned. So that's where we wind up in dukkha. But everything starts in ignorance. We're ignorant of the fact that you can get burned if you stick your hand in the fire.
Ignorance of, would you say ignorance of the three
Dukkha.
characteristics?
Yes.
Dukkha is one of them, but also the impermanence and the no self of
Mm-hmm.
sensational reality.
Right. So the first thing that we do is that we wake up to the dukkha, and then we recognize, oh, the dukkha comes from the fact that everything is really, really changing. that we got to watch the road. Things dart out into the road. Things are constantly in a flux. And that when we cling to things, that's the self. And so we learn to, like in the Dojin, just forget about me and just get easy going. Yeah, so what if the thoughts are random? Not a big deal, because I can make a change. Before, when things happened and I got all involved and all uptight because I didn't like the thoughts that I was having, now I can say, oh, nothing to it. Why should I cling to it? Why should I reach my hand in the fire to get that which what I want? Because putting your hand in the fire, that grasping and clinging, is what burns.
So
I'm glad you brought up the Paticca Samuppada, because, in fact, that's a natural place to go from the issue of the second noble truth, is that we're ignorant, that we're stupid, in fact, ignorantly stupid, that this fire is hot. Don't put your hand in it. Getting angry at the cop is a really, really terrible thing to do. That, in fact, we see a lot of stuff on the internet about people who are trying to own the cops, and they wind up getting busted.
Now, sometimes I get in the state of mind of the supra mundane understanding that even the hand that just puts itself in the fire, all of that is not me, and it's just all
Not
happening.
me. Right.
But it's weird. When you're out of it, you can see that even all the suffering you've experienced, all of that stuff, and even the thing that happened, it was all kind of just part of the story that was unfolding due to causes and conditions. But that's from the eye of wisdom. You're out of the ignorance at that point.
Mm-hmm. Wake
But
up. That's
but
exactly right.
but there's kind of like a weird like denial that it when you're in ignorance, you want to claim that wisdom and be in denial of the dukkha that you're experiencing.
Experiencing.
And
Precisely.
I see that so often in like spiritual circles, and it's hard to break. Well, I've been there too myself, so I can't.
Especially if they're supported in those spiritual circles, they
Right.
support each other's dukkha.
Well, I've been there myself too, but it's hard to break through to those people who are in that state, who are kind of clinging to spiritual teachings as a sort of coping mechanism instead of
All right.
understanding it fully.
One more point about that hard. The reason that it's hard is because you want them to wake up sooner
Right.
than they do, rather than letting them be on their own schedule
On their
and
own
keep pointing
schedule.
out to them,
Okay.
okay, that it's
Okay.
hard for you to stand by and watch them crawl right back into the fire.
It is hard, yes. Especially when they're a good friend of yours.
Mm-hmm. And you got to let them crawl back into the fire.
And you can't and it's hard because I don't I don't want to follow them in the fire with them. So
That's
sometimes I
right.
just have to leave them and maybe I'll never see them again. So that
Who
gives
knows? I mean, you could fall into the fire and then you never see them again. Who knows?
right. But that how do I deal with the grief of losing someone to the fire and knowing that I can't go in there with them?
But that kind of grief is just a thought. You
Just
can
a thought.
actually be happy instead of being in grief. You can be happy that you're not going in the fire with them this time. That, in fact, grieving over them is your own kind of fire. They went into the yellow fire and you went into a blue fire. So happily let them go. and then happily see them when they return. Your choice. It's always your choice if you can remember that. But it's really hard to watch them crawl into the fire. This is part of the training. It's hard because we don't want to see them burned, but we don't want to see them burned, and we're burning ourselves with our desire to not see them burned. Rather than just letting them go, okay, that's what they did. I got mine. If they want it, I'll give it to them. But if they don't want it, I'm not going to try to force it down their throat. This is the main difference between the teaching of the Buddha and Buddhism in general being non-proselytizing
Not
versus the
proselytizing.
Christianity
Yeah.
of they're going to make you be a Christian whether you
Yeah.
want to be or not. We're going to
Right. But
pass laws here. No more abortions and all of that kind of stuff.
well, yeah, that's but that's the difference between a dogmatic Christian versus a true Christian mystic, like Eckhart Tolle, for example.
Not so many of those are there. Mostly
There's
what we're
not a
dealing
lot.
with is
And the true Christian mystics were often persecuted by other Christians for being a heretic.
exactly.
Right? They were like,
exactly.
it, what do you mean you don't get God from the government of Christianity, the Pope, and you have to go through us. You can't find it on your own. You have
Mm-hmm.
to go through the power structure that's in state. That's why Buddhism appeals to me, but I still do resonate with like the true teachings of Jesus, or like something,
I wish more Christians would.
right? Because some of the things that Eckhart Tolle talked about is very Buddhist in nature. Like
ah,
Eckhart Tolle said, like to be poor in spirit, to own nothing, to have nothing, and to will nothing. That's pretty anatta as it gets.
mm-hmm.
That to own nothing, like to not even own your own thoughts, not even own your own feelings, bodily sensations that arise,
Right.
sensory contact.
Absolutely, because in fact the reality is that our thoughts are rarely our own thoughts. Almost all of our thoughts are learned behavior that we got from somebody else. I actually do remind people on a regular basis that there is no Dhammarato's teaching, that it's all second hand, third hand, fifth hand. I got it from others, that it don't belong to me. So my wisdom, my thoughts, all of that kind of stuff is all borrowed material. If we could all understand that and recognize that, then we would not cling to our thoughts nearly so much because they don't belong to me. Even my opinions are not real opinions of mine. They're learned. Just like a lot of the people who have opinions about politics, they picked it up from the news. And so those people who love Trump, they learned to love Trump from other people who learned to love Trump. They picked it up from Fox, they picked it up from someplace, and yet they still think that it's their own private personal opinion that they worked out for themselves, where in fact, no, they just picked it up from someplace else. If the preachers would teach actually what Jesus said, then the whole community would pick that up and be that way. But in fact, what was happening over the past, let us say from the mid 1960s up until the 1980s, is they were listening to people like Pat Robertson, who wanted to have his, let us say, he was more influenced by politics than he was influenced by Jesus. And so Christianity has gone through a major transformation during my lifetime. not to its advantage, because they're not listening to Jesus so much and learning what he had to say and thinking those thoughts, Jesus kind of thoughts. They're listening to Republican Party kind of thoughts, which is all in it for the money, power. Christianity will be a whole lot better off if they can control the government, so they think.
It's mostly tribalism. Like,
It sure is.
our people are different from your people and need to be in more power, which is based from a fundamentally anti-Christ-like point of view.
Exactly. Because Jesus' point of view is that a good neighbor, the Samaritan, those people over there can do good too. That racism is not just tribalism at the instinctual level, that racism is actually learned behavior. Toddlers, Asian, black kids, white kids, Latinos can play happy together at the age of 2 and 3. They
Right.
learn to hate each other because they're taught to hate each other,
It's
so that by the
learned.
time they're teenagers,
Yeah.
they're out there killing each other.
Yeah. Children don't know how to be racist. If you put a black child and a white child together, they would become good buddies and just play together. And people learn differences and judgments through culture and society. Like, I totally understand that. Another thing that I was thinking about is on the theme of talking about Jesus Christ and being Christ-like. It seems like that's included in a certain aspect of Buddhism, but it's not the entire picture. Like, it doesn't include it's more on the side of the Brahma Viharas and Sila aspect, but it doesn't include the wisdom part or the direct insight into the nature of reality. It seems like Christianity is missing the direct realization of things as they actually are. They're more trying to only cultivate the love and the wholesomeness, but they don't have the sort of uh realization that, like, this is God, like this moment is God, like God
Here it
is.
is. God's
Yeah.
all over me.
They
I
think
can't deny God is my environment.
they think it's somewhere else. Like, they think
Right.
God
It's up
is.
there someplace. It's out of
Yeah.
sight. The kingdom of God is not within them. The kingdom of God is not the abbot or the above or the about.
Right.
That Abba is way out there someplace.
Right.
But that's been taught. They could teach it better. They could teach that God's right here. He's all over your body. All right. Well, I think that we pretty well covered this.
I think so too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Scott. I really enjoyed our time together.
Well, thank you, Dhammarato. It was really good talking to you.
Yeah,
Thank you
we'll
so
see
much.
you again soon sometime. Okay?
Okay, see you.
All right.
All right, bye-bye.